Good morning. Welcome to another Sunday school class online. And I'm just going to jump right into it because I've got a lot to say to you this morning. This pandemic may have us fearful, tired, and confused for the last 2 months. And I'm thinking, has it only been 2 months? But during this time, some have lost family and friends. All have lost income and savings. I have not even looked at my retirement savings plan for the past 2 months. I've not even opened my statements that have come in. So we've all lost income and or savings. We've lost freedoms and routines. We've missed or postponed graduations and weddings, birthdays and vacations. But what I want to tell you this morning is through it all, through all of the disappointment, through all of the loss, we can be strong and we can be resilient. We must be. So today I want to talk to you about some strong, resilient, godly women who have made such an impression on me through the years. First, we're going to go to the book of Judges. We're going to look some in the fourth chapter of Judges, and then we're going to look at Proverbs 31. And in the book of Judges, we find the story of Deborah. Now, Deborah, God had given Deborah the gift of prophecy and song, and he had also called her to be a judge of Israel, where she actually determined justice and gave frequent advice to the people. So everyone knew her. They sang her songs because she was also a songwriter, and they sang her praises. She was just a very much admired leader. And so the book of Judges starts out like this. Now, after the death of Joshua, so that's where we are. That gives you an idea of where we are historically. And then chapter 2 says, so the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works that the Lord had done for Israel. So those people had come and gone now. So when that generation had been gathered to their fathers, when they had died, when they passed on, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work he had done for Israel. And that is where God raised up judges. You might remember Gideon, the story of Gideon. He was a judge. And Deborah, the prophetess, was judging Israel at this time. The 4th chapter and the 4th verse tells us. I love this picture of her. You can just imagine this. She would sit under the palm tree of Deborah, the scripture tells us, in the mountains of Ephraim, and she would hold court in the mountains under this palm tree of Deborah. And so one day she called for Barak, who was the Israeli military man. He was a commander of thousands of people. And she reminded him of what God had told him. And she said, hasn't God told you, hasn't the Lord God of Israel commanded you to go and deploy the troops at Mount Tabor? Now take you 10,000 men and I will deliver the enemy into your hand. Didn't God tell you that, Barak? So she's gently reminding him. And let's see. So Barak said to her, this mighty military man with 10,000 at least troops under him, said to her, if you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Imagine that. So Deborah said, I will surely go with you. And she did go with him, and God gave them a great victory and delivered them from the hands of the enemy that had enslaved them for 20 years. So Deborah was a prophetess, a judge, a leader, a singer, and she was also strong. She was smart, wise, courageous, and godly. And Esther is another strong, courageous, godly woman that saved the nation of Israel, if you remember that story, as was Ruth. And who could forget the Proverbs 31 woman, which is our example? But these strong women, and there are many more in the Bible, but those are the ones that came to my mind, have been such an inspiration for me, even when I was younger, especially when I was younger, as heroes, women that I could look up to and I could aspire somewhat to be like them. And so I'm going to, the 31st chapter of Proverbs now talks about the virtuous wife and says, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. We've heard this scripture many times on Mother's Day. So I just want to say happy Mother's Day to you. You're worth your weight in gold is how we might say that today, or at least in rubies. So it describes her as she seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. And we're going to find out also her mind in verse 16 when we get to that. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. So what I see here is this woman had a procurement role. Okay. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household. She is a provider. I see her, if she were here today, she would be that one out there when the store opens looking for chicken breasts, ground beef, and toilet paper and Clorox wipes. It goes on to say she considers a field and buys it. So she has vision. And from her profits, she plants a vineyard. So she is also a businesswoman. She's an entrepreneur here. She girds herself with strength, and she perceives that her merchandise is good. She has confidence that her product is good. Her lamp does not go out by night. She's industrious, and she stretches out her hand to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle, and what that says to me is she gets it done. But also in all of this strength and all of this taking care of her family, she never forgets others. She extends her hand to the poor. She reaches out her hands to the needy. She is a compassionate woman. She is not afraid of snow for her household or cold weather or anything like that, we would say, because her household is clothed with scarlet. So she's creative. She's a designer, a seamstress, and she makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. So ladies, pay attention to this. And all of this, she takes care of herself too. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be there to take care of others. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. So she is not lazy. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. And so what I want to do today is rise up and call some women blessed. Her children rise up and call her blessed. So in addition to these women from the Bible who I had as models, I'm just reminded today of how blessed I am to have been surrounded from an early age by many of these Proverbs 31 women, strong, smart, courageous, wise, and godly women who have been very active in my life. My grandmother, my mom, my aunts, all of these who, like Deborah, Esther, and Ruth are wonderfully strong women who have persevered through much in their own rights and have not only survived but have thrived. So I was looking, I was seeking information this week about my grandmama because I was thinking about how I was going to do this. And I talked to Jewel and Esther, and but when I came back from talking to Jewel, I looked in my treasure box of things that, well, when we cleaned out my mom's house, getting it ready for sale, anything that had my mom's handwriting or my dad's handwriting on it, I threw into a box. And I'll go back from time to time and look at that box. And here is a little treasure of a little book that my mom wrote some things in. And included in those things is apparently my grandmother had dictated some things to her. And I want to just read you a little bit of that. My grandmother says, this is her own memories. The earliest memory I have of home was Langley, South Carolina. She tells where she lived, what house she lived in. And she talks about that her mom and dad worked at the Langley Mill from 6 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. But on Saturdays, her mama got off work at noon. And they had good neighbors, actually very good neighbors that looked out for them while their parents worked. The McGraws is what their names are, very good neighbors. They watched out for us and told Mama when we did dangerous things like playing with the well. So grandmother had a sister Roselle and a brother Bradford. And Roselle and Radford, would pull the bucket of water up out of the well. They pull that up. And then my grandmother, who was about 7 or 8 at the time, would lean over and pull the bucket out of the well. And she says if they had let go of that crank, she would have ended up at the bottom of the well. And so the mother was told, the good neighbors knew this was very dangerous, and told grandmother's mom. And she said, but we didn't have to worry about it anymore. She doesn't talk about being scolded or anything like that. She said we had no need to play in the well after that because Mama and Daddy left us fresh water to drink. And Daddy would come home on his break and draw us a pail of fresh water. So I want you to think about that, of how different just a couple of generations ago, some people, our kin, how they had to live. And so another good memory she has, I love this one, is about her mom doing her hair. She said her mama would braid her hair. She'd fix her hair with 2 long braids. She said she had black hair down to her waist. And she would put these braids in it every week. And on the weekends, I remember pulling the shade down at the window, and it would make it look like reflect like a mirror. And I would stand there and take those braids out and brush my hair with all those crinkles the braids made and think how pretty it looked. So those are good little girl memories. But right after the memory of brushing her hair are the words, after my mother got sick. And so things changed very rapidly for this little family after her mother got sick. She said she stayed with Minnie for a little while. Minnie was a neighbor, and Minnie would let me help wash dishes and take care of her baby. I loved babies. And we know that to be true because she went on to have 12 of her own babies. So her mother did pass, and her dad actually left them at that time, and he left them with a sister, her sister and her brother, with various aunts and uncles. Some were good, some were not so good. Aunt May was one of the good ones. She mentions Aunt May. We'll talk about Aunt May a little bit here in a minute. And he returned after some time, with the proverbial stepmother, Rachel. And I don't know why. I don't know if any of us know. I couldn't find this out. At some point, he left the children again with Rachel, and Rachel was an abusive woman, and she was an abusive mother. And my grandmother said more than once that her brother, that Radford, would carry the physical scars of the abuse he suffered from her during this time to his grave. So we know she was an abusive woman. So after Daddy left me with my stepmother, Rachel, she sent me to live for a while with her sisters and family. There was Addie, the sister, her husband Henry, and 2 boys, Alan and Amos. I cooked, washed, ironed, worked in the fields, and took care of the whole household during the week, while Miss Addie lived in Augusta and worked there in the Augusta Mill. She came home to Blythe on the weekends. So at 13, this was during this time she turned 13. And it was during this time that I was staying with Miss Addie that my daddy's sister, Aunt May, the good one, came and went to court to try to get me to come back and live with her. She had heard that Miss Addie wasn't sending me to school and was leaving me with her husband and 2 sons during the week all alone. I learned early how to look out for myself. I latched my door at night and had a quick reply when out-of-the-way comments were made to me. All I had to do was just threaten to tell Miss Addie. I just can't imagine this child having to go through this. And you might wonder why I didn't run away and go back to live with Aunt May. Well, you see, I lived with Aunt May for a little while after my mother died, and she was really very good to me. She had 2 daughters of her own, and she gave me some of their pretty dresses, and she also made new dresses for me. She sent me to school, and I had plenty to eat. That reminds me that there's also a piece in here when she says Miss May sent her to school. When she was staying with Miss Addie, in addition to the household chores that she did, she also helped at planting season and again in the fall to harvest the crops. And she was out of school so much she couldn't keep up with her class. And she says she begged the 6th grade teacher to let me take the test to enter 7th grade, but she said I had missed too many days to have been promoted. And then I love this. She says, I know I could have passed that test. And I believe she could have too. But at any rate, she ended up dropping out of school because she couldn't keep up with all the moves and having to work in the fields and everything. So anyway, back to Aunt May. Why wouldn't I want to go back to Aunt May? And here's why. When I went to Blythe, I went to a church that preached Jesus and how to get saved. I knew that Aunt May didn't know about Jesus the way I knew about him now, and I also knew she wouldn't let me go to that church. And she also remembered sleeping one night. She overheard a conversation between Aunt May and her husband, where the husband was saying, I know, your brother, which was my grandmother's dad, promised to send some money each month to help take care of Belle, my grandmother. And he said, I don't have any problem clothing and feeding her, but I do think he should pay the doctor bills. At this time, my grandmother started some fainting spells, which actually she would have for the rest of her life. And he thought that, you know, he needed some help with that. And the next day, they gave her a letter to address to her daddy. They did not know that she had overheard them talking, and that weekend her daddy came and got her and took her back where she ended up at this other place in Blythe. She said she never blamed Aunt May because I thought my daddy should have taken care of me. And by now, her daddy had walked off and left. He had left Rachel, and actually, what I found out from conversations this week is he had gone, I don't know, to North Carolina or Tennessee and married a third woman, even though he wasn't divorced from Rachel. And this woman didn't even know that he had been married and had other children. So anyway, she ended up before a judge, and she knew that she was going to have to make a choice, grandmama, as to where she was going to live. And she made it a matter of prayer, this young middle school girl. She prayed and prayed about this decision. A gentleman overheard her praying, and she said, when she got through praying, he said, "Pray it out, sister, pray it out." So she really prayed. So when the judge asked her where she wanted to live, I thought of these things about, I loved God and Jesus as I knew them now. My experience of salvation was very real to me. I loved my church also. And I didn't want to owe my soul to the company store, as she put it. I knew that I was earning every penny it took for my keep, and I chose to stay at Blythe. Now that is from just a 13-year-old. It's just amazing. She certainly was a survivor, and she was wise, and she was godly even at the time, taking this matter to prayer and following God's leading on this. And so there's another, this I did not know. I never heard this till this week. At 15, she was engaged, and she had her heart broken when she discovered this man that she was engaged to was already married. You know, I don't know the circumstances here, but they say often a young girl will be attracted to men like her daddy. I want you men to listen to that. And this could have been what happened here, because it certainly is a familiar story in her life. But at 16, she started working at a mill in Augusta, Georgia, and attending the Church of God in Augusta, where she met and later married my granddaddy. And what I remember, my grandmother was smart, she was an avid reader, and she was wise. And what a legacy this little girl who was deserted and abused had. She went on to have 12 children, 11 of which survived into adulthood. And I knew all of them personally. That's a blessing. She had 30, if my count is right, she had 38, she has 38 grandchildren and 62 great-grands. She inspired the love of reading and gardening in her children and grandchildren. And she had a very sharp business mind. She was self-taught, if you will. So from these children and grandchildren and great-grands, she has had family that has served in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and Marines. Her children and grandchildren went on to the medical field, law, education, aviation, journalism, administration, transportation, have held and currently holds political office. There were factory workers, church ministry, people worked both as pastoral and music ministry, and everything in between, really. She has the culinary arts are represented among these great-grands, and there are several small business owners. So what a legacy I have learned from these strong, godly women, my grandmother, and then my mom, and then my aunts. So Esther, Naomi, and Jewel, thank you for pouring into me. And I want to read something now from a birthday card that I found in my treasure box that my mom sent me some years ago. And if you're feeling overwhelmed today, let these words from my mama comfort and inspire you, because I feel like this absolutely could be taken from today's world. She says, Dear Marilyn, though this past year has been the most confusing year of my life, it has also been a year of searching for the things that truly count. Is that how you feel right now? And she said, these are the things that count to me. Number one, that in times like these, I have an anchor. That when the wind blows and the waves pound the boat, my trust is in Jesus, who said, peace be still. And the sea became calm. My trust is in God, who knows the beginning and the end, and I don't have to fear tomorrow. That is such good advice for today. When I can't go forward and I won't go back, the rock is still there to stand on. And then she says, it's a comfort to know that you also are standing on the promises. And I love this. I've learned the value of a daughter who is also a friend. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and you can't go forward and you won't go back, I just want to encourage you to stand on the rock today, to not give up, and put your trust in Jesus. And I'm going to leave you with that. Have a wonderful, happy Mother's Day.